You are lying awake again. Not because something went wrong, not because the job ended or the market crashed or the emergency happened. You are lying there because the numbers are running again, same as last night, same as the night before. And there is this quiet pressure in the chest that never fully leaves. You do the math without meaning to. The mortgage, the insurance, the taxes folded inside the payment. You tell yourself you are fine, and technically you are. But fine and free are not the same thing, and somewhere beneath the doing okay surface, you know it. I want to tell you something I did not understand for a long time. The mortgage is not only a payment, it is a teacher. And what it teaches the soul, month after month, year after year, is this. Peace has conditions. Safety is rented. You are only stable until you are not. That lesson goes deep, deeper than the spreadsheet, deeper than the rate you locked in. It settles into the way you make decisions, the way you hold your breath before you spend, the way generosity feels like a risk instead of a flow. I bought my first house young. I thought ownership would feel like arrival. I thought the deed would carry some kind of settled weight, like standing on ground instead of floating above it. What I discovered instead was that the house did not end the fear. It gave the fear a mailing address. What I am about to tell you is not about real estate strategy. It is not about refinancing. It is not a lecture on equity or leverage or any of the language the financial world uses to make the complicated sound like wisdom. What I am about to tell you is older than that. It is about a threshold most people cross without understanding what it offers. And because they miss it, the freedom they finally reach does not feel like freedom at all. Stay with me, because the biggest shift is not the payment disappearing. It is a hidden law, and almost nobody teaches it. You have probably been around people like you, hard-working, disciplined, not foolish with money, maybe even careful in ways most people are not. And still there is this feeling that something is leaking, that the effort is not returning what it should, that you are doing what you were told to do, and yet the inner relief never fully comes. This is not a character flaw. I need you to hear that clearly. The exhaustion you carry is not proof that you are broken or behind or less than. It is what happens when a person lives too long under sustained financial pressure with no clean release. The nervous system adapts. It learns to stay alert. It learns to grip. And after enough years of that, the grip becomes the default, even when the crisis has not arrived. You are not anxious because you are weak. You are vigilant because you have been trained to be. The strain shows up everywhere. In the marriage, where money conversations carry a sharpness they did not used to carry. In parenting, where the background worry colors things it should not color. In sleep, in planning, in the quiet moment when an opportunity arrives, and instead of moving toward it with confidence, you feel the old contraction, the careful retreat, the familiar voice that says, "Not yet. Not safe enough yet." That voice is not wisdom. That voice is the debt talking, and it has been talking for a long time. I learned this not from a course or a seminar or a best-selling book about financial independence. I learned it from watching. And before the watching, I learned it from being shown. There is a generation of thinking I was raised around that understood money as something with a spirit, not only a function. Not superstition, not mysticism for its own sake, but a recognition that the inner condition of the household shapes the outer flow of provision. The elders I grew up around did not separate the practical from the sacred. They watched both. They noticed patterns most people were moving too fast to see, and one of the patterns they watched most carefully was this: what a family does with a burden when the burden finally lifts. I want to tell you about a particular evening. I was young, maybe 10 or 11, and there had been a hard season in our house. Not dramatic poverty, but the kind of tightness that lives just beneath the surface of a family. The quietness around the table when the month has been long. The way adults speak carefully without fully explaining. That evening had been different. There were guests earlier, some kind of gathering, and after they left the house was still and soft in the way a house sometimes is after people go. Low light, the smell of something that had been cooked and cleared away. My grandfather was sitting at the table. He had a ledger open, or something that looked like one. Old hands, patient stillness, the kind of quiet that did not need to be explained. I came and sat near him without being invited. He looked at me for a moment, and then he looked back at the table and said something I did not understand then, and could not forget later. He said, "A house should be a shelter for blessing, not an altar where the family keeps sacrificing its peace." I nodded as if I understood. I did not understand. I was too young to know what an altar of sacrifice looked like from the inside. I would find out later. I think most people find out later. Years passed. I became someone who worked with families and their money in the way a physician works with the body over time. Not quickly, not for transactions, but in the long arc of a life. And I saw the sentence again and again, not written anywhere, just lived out in front of me. Families who had paid off the house and entered something lighter. Families who had paid off the house and somehow immediately rebuilt a new pressure in its place. The difference was not income. It was not luck. It was something in the spirit of the crossing. And that is when I understood what the old man had meant. Now I want to speak directly to the advice that most of you have been given, because I think it deserves to be examined honestly. You have been told to budget more carefully, to optimize the interest rate, to maximize returns, to keep money working, always working, to think in terms of leverage and spreads and compound growth, to treat every dollar as a soldier in a portfolio, deployed for maximum efficiency. And none of that is wrong exactly. It is just profoundly incomplete. What the conventional money world almost never discusses is what prolonged debt does to the inner life of the person carrying it. Not the interest cost, not the balance sheet, the psychic weight. The way that a respected, manageable, financially appropriate mortgage can still quietly train a household to live in a low-grade state of obligation. The way it teaches the soul to defer, to hold back, to measure generosity in terms of what is left over, to approve its own rest only provisionally, only if the numbers still look right. You can be perfectly rational on paper and spiritually diminished in practice. That is the part they leave out of the webinar. The fantasy is that more complexity equals more mastery, that the person with the more sophisticated financial structure is the wiser person. But I have sat across from people who could explain their portfolio in remarkable detail and still could not sleep without checking the accounts one more time. Technique without alignment, numbers without posture. A very precise map of a road that still leads to the same anxious destination. The question I was trained to ask is not only how much do you have, the question is what spirit are you handling it in? Because the spirit determines the flow, and you cannot fix a spiritual problem with a financial instrument. What changes everything is not simply eliminating the payment. The payment is visible. The shift I am talking about is deeper. It happens in the interior of the household, in the way a person begins to make decisions once the primary obligation no longer speaks first. It happens in the breath before the choice, in the speed of generosity, in the quality of the stillness. But here is what most people are never told. It does not happen automatically. Two families can make the same last payment in the same month and enter completely different futures. One of them crosses the threshold into release, gratitude, open hands, a different authority over their home. The other makes the last payment and within weeks is already assembling a new burden, chasing the next obligation, carrying the same inner script into a different costume. The payoff is a doorway, but a doorway is not the same as a room. You have to walk through it the right way, or you never really enter. The third movement is gratitude. And I mean this precisely. Not the performed kind, not the social kind, not the kind you announce to make yourself look humble. Private gratitude. The kind that happens in a quiet room, or early in the morning before the house wakes up, or late at night when the running numbers have finally gone still. Gratitude for the shelter, for the years of provision that made the payments possible even when it was hard, for the survival itself, because some families do not make it to the other side of that mortgage, and you did. That gratitude is not sentiment, it is alignment. It is the soul acknowledging that it did not carry this alone, and that what it received was not only its own accomplishment. The fourth movement is the one that trips people the most. Set aside a first portion intentionally, before the planning starts, before the strategy meetings, before the advisor calls, before the reinvestment decisions. Not because money is magic, not because giving creates a mechanical return you can time and measure, but because the act of releasing something first, freely and without calculating the outcome, declares something to yourself and to whatever you believe governs the flow of provision. It declares that fear no longer owns the first move, that you are not the same person who spent years clenching, that the freedom has changed your posture, not only your balance sheet. The fifth movement is spoken. Say what the home is now. Name it. Your house is no longer a place ruled by monthly threat. It is a base, a place of peace, a shelter, the way the old man meant it, not an altar for sacrifice, but a foundation for living forward. That declaration is not spiritual theatre. It is a reprogramming of the interior script that has been running since the first payment. These 5 movements take very little time, but almost no one does them. Because no one tells you that the crossing requires intention. They tell you to celebrate and then get back to optimizing. Now I want to go beneath the actions, because the actions matter less than the spirit inside them. You can do every visible thing correctly and still close the door with your intention. I have seen it happen. A person marks the moment, expresses gratitude, gives something generously, speaks well about their household, follows every outer step, and yet somewhere in the interior they are doing it with the energy of a person trying to force a result. Giving, but calculating the return. Resting, but anxious about whether they are resting correctly. Expressing gratitude, but secretly negotiating with heaven. That is still control. It is just wearing a more respectable uniform. The inner posture that opens the threshold is relief without arrogance, gratitude without superstition, hope without frenzy. It is the willingness to receive the freedom that has arrived without immediately trying to manage it into submission. Let the relief be real. Stop speaking like a hunted person once the hunt is over. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Because when you have been in vigilance for years, the body learns to manufacture threats. The nervous system that kept you careful does not automatically disband once the danger passes. It has to be retrained. And the retraining begins with a choice, repeated over days and weeks, to stop narrating your finances from inside a siege. Ask what this freedom is meant to serve, not what you want to buy with it, what it is for. Family peace. The ability to give without resentment, patient investment without panic, work you choose rather than work you are chained to, rest that is genuinely restful, the space to think clearly about the next generation. These are the rightful inheritances of the threshold you just crossed, but you have to name them or the old patterns will name the space for you. Now let me tell you what corrupts this, because the method is not complicated, but it is fragile in specific ways, and you deserve to know where it breaks. Greed breaks it first. When the payoff becomes a launch pad for appetite instead of alignment, when the first question is, how much more can I accumulate now? The spirit of the crossing is already bent. The opening was not given to you as a starting gun for accumulation. It was given to you as a reset. Treat it as a race, and you will run right back into the same breathless exhaustion wearing a bigger number. Ego breaks it second. When the paid-off house becomes a performance, when it becomes something you mention in conversation a little too often, when freedom turns into a credential you are quietly using to establish your superiority, you have already infected the gift. Blessing does not rest comfortably where it is used as leverage over other people. Desperation breaks it in the most invisible way, because desperation can dress itself in spiritual clothes. The person who gives generously not from overflow but from panic, who follows the ritual sequence while secretly white-knuckling for a result, who prays with clenched hands, is still operating from fear. The form is right, but the interior is still cornered. and cornered people cannot hold what clean flow brings because they squeeze it before it can settle. Resentment is the corruption most people do not expect. You reach the freedom and you look back at the years and you feel the anger about what those years cost you. The marriage tension, the missed opportunities, the times you wanted to give and could not, the times fear made you smaller than you wanted to be. That resentment is understandable. It is also a poison that will sit in the opening and sour it if you let it stay. The crossing is not the time to settle the score with the past. It is the time to release the past entirely and decide what kind of person you are going to be now that you are no longer defined by the weight you carried. And then there is the fastest corruption of all, immediate re-enslavement. The new car loan, the investment property financed to the edge of comfort, the home equity line opened before the paint has dried on the freedom. I have watched people pay off a house and within 6 months rebuild an identical psychological burden through a different instrument. Because the burden was familiar. Because freedom, real freedom, felt like exposure. Because without the obligation telling them who they were, they did not know who to be. That is the deepest teaching inside this whole conversation. The house payment was not only a financial obligation. For many people, it had quietly become an identity. It told them they were responsible. It told them they were managing. It gave them a reason to stay careful, to stay defended, to stay small in a way that felt like maturity. And when it ends, if they have not prepared for who they are without it, they will rebuild it. Not because they are foolish, because the soul abhors a vacuum, and if freedom is not filled with something intentional, fear will fill it. This is who you are becoming if you cross the threshold the right way. You are no longer organized around protection. You are organized around provision, not just for yourself, but as a kind of channel for what flows through your household. The decisions you make now come from a different place, not from the defensive corner where you calculate whether you can afford to be generous, from the open place where you ask how generosity fits into the larger shape of what you are building. The house is no longer a symbol of pressure, it is a base. From a base you build forward instead of endlessly shoring up. From a base you can see further. You can wait longer without panic. You can hear guidance more clearly because the noise of obligation has finally gone quiet. I have watched this happen in real families, not in theory, in rooms I have sat in, at tables where I have been trusted. I watched a marriage soften, not because the money suddenly multiplied, but because the low-grade frequency of financial fear stopped running beneath every conversation. They did not have more. They had less pressure. And less pressure changed everything. The way a room feels different when you remove one constant low sound you had stopped noticing. I watched a man make a business decision he had been circling for 3 years. He could not point to why he had hesitated so long, but once the house was paid and the method was honored and the posture was clean, he heard himself say yes in a meeting without the old contraction. The obligation had been quietly choking the imagination. When it lifted, clarity returned. I watched a woman begin to give in ways she had always wanted to give and could not explain why she had not before. Not because she now had more to give, because she had stopped calculating whether she could afford to be generous. That calculation was the mortgage's child, and when the mortgage ended, the calculation lost its authority. The most dramatic changes were often invisible at first. Sleep, speech, the speed of decision, the ease of rest. The way a person talks about the future without the defensive qualifications. The way they stop flinching when the conversation turns to money. This is only one doorway. I want you to understand that. Paying off the house is not the whole teaching. It is not the final arrival. It is the first clean threshold into a larger order of alignment that governs stewardship, timing, generosity, flow, and the way households carry blessing across generations. There is more to this map. There are older teachings about how freed households build, how they give, how they invest, how they prepare the next generation to receive increase without being destroyed by it. What I have given you today is the beginning, a real beginning, but a beginning. So let me close with what I was taught to close with. When a burden lifts, The soul must be taught how to live unburdened. That is not optional. That is the work. When the house is paid off, the family must not return to fear in a different costume, must not rebuild the altar of sacrifice with new materials, must not cross the threshold and then stand just inside it, too afraid to walk further into the room. Freedom must be consecrated, or it will be wasted. I am speaking over your finances now, not as a transaction, but as a transmission. May your household know the peace that is deeper than a bank balance. May your sleep return to you. May your marriage find the softness that pressure stole from it. May your generosity flow from a place that is not calculating, not compensating, not performing. May your money move through a spirit that is no longer organized around fear. May your children feel a different atmosphere in the home, even if they cannot name what changed. May your decisions come from patience rather than panic, from alignment rather than emergency. May the house you own become what it was always supposed to be. Not a monthly reminder that your security has conditions, but a shelter, a foundation, a place where blessing rests. You are not a prisoner trying to survive the next payment. You are a steward of what has been entrusted to you, and that changes everything. If that landed somewhere real in you, write this in the comments. My house will carry peace, not pressure. Say it as a declaration over what is coming, not a wish about what is missing. And if you are ready to go deeper into how aligned households actually build, how the old principles of flow, timing, and sacred stewardship work together across a life, stay close. What I shared today is the door. There is a great deal more room inside.